A single father stopped kidnappers from forcing a woman into a van outside a downtown hotel. He never knew she was one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. Tonight, I'm sharing the story of Grayson Foster, a warehouse supervisor and former veteran who became an unlikely hero when he witnessed something horrifying on a quiet Tuesday evening. What he didn't know was that saving one woman's life would transform everything: his bank account, his son's future, and his understanding of what courage truly costs. Stay with me until the end, and comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels around the world. Because what started as a split-second decision in a hotel parking lot became a journey through wealth, danger, betrayal, and second chances that neither Grayson nor the woman he saved, CEO Cassidy Rhodes, could have ever predicted. This is a story about what happens when ordinary people do extraordinary things. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Hammond Distribution Center buzzed overhead like angry wasps as Grayson Foster checked his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. 6:47 p.m. His shift had officially ended 17 minutes ago, but Derek, his supervisor, was still processing paperwork for a last-minute shipment that absolutely had to go out tonight. Grayson stood by the loading dock, his steel-toed boots planted on concrete he'd walked across for the past 4 years, and tried not to think about how Miles was doing at home. His 8-year-old son was with their neighbor, Edith Walsh, a retired schoolteacher who lived 2 doors down in their apartment complex in the Ashford Heights neighborhood. Edith never complained about watching Miles, never asked for more than the $20 Grayson pressed into her hand each time, but guilt still gnawed at him every single evening when work ran late. At 36 years old, Grayson had learned that life rarely went according to plan. He'd learned it when his wife, Monica, walked out 3 years ago, leaving behind a note on the kitchen counter and divorce papers in the mail 6 weeks later. No explanation beyond, "I need to find myself, and this isn't the life I imagined." She'd remarried within a year, moved to another state, and the support checks she'd promised never materialized. So Grayson worked. He supervised the evening shift at Hammond Distribution, making sure freight got sorted and loaded correctly, managing a team of 12 workers who depended on his steady presence. The pay was decent, enough to cover rent and groceries and Miles's school supplies, but there was never anything extra. Never enough to save for emergencies, or plan for the future, or buy his son the new bicycle he'd been asking about for 6 months. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Edith. "Miles, finished his homework. We're watching a nature documentary about whales. Take your time, dear." Grayson smiled despite his exhaustion. Edith was a godsend. After Monica left, it had been Edith who'd shown up with casseroles and patience, who'd taught Grayson how to braid Miles's hair for school pictures, who'd been the grandmother figure his son desperately needed. "Foster, you're good to go," Derek called from the office doorway. "Thanks for staying late. I'll make sure it reflects on your time card." "Appreciate it." Grayson grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door, a worn denim thing that had seen better days but still kept out the autumn chill. The walk to his truck took him past rows of shipping containers and warehouse buildings, the industrial heart of Stockton Bay's commercial district. His vehicle was a 15-year-old Ford pickup that burned oil and made concerning noises when he accelerated too fast, but it ran, and that was what mattered. The drive home took him through downtown, past the gleaming towers of the financial district, where people in expensive suits made more in a day than Grayson earned in a month. He never resented them, exactly. He'd learned long ago that bitterness changed nothing. You played the hand you were dealt, worked hard, and hoped your son would have better opportunities than you did. That philosophy had been drilled into him during his 6 years in the service, before he'd met Monica, before Miles was born, before he'd transitioned to civilian life and discovered that military discipline translated better to warehouse work than to white-collar careers. He rarely talked about those years now. They felt like they'd happened to someone else, in a different lifetime. Grayson was stopped at a red light on Chancellor Avenue, right in front of the Apex Grand Hotel, when he noticed the black van. It had pulled up to the hotel's side entrance with aggressive speed, tires squealing slightly on the pristine pavement. Something about the way it stopped, the way the engine kept running, triggered an old instinct he'd thought he'd left behind. He watched as a woman emerged from the hotel, even from across the street, even in the gathering dusk. She commanded attention. She wore a tailored charcoal suit and moved with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. A hotel attendant walked beside her, gesturing toward the valet area where a sleek black sedan waited. Then everything went wrong. The van's side door flew open, and two figures burst out, moving with terrifying coordination. They wore dark clothing and masks that covered their faces. And they moved like professionals who'd done this before. The woman didn't even have time to scream before the first man grabbed her arm, yanking her away from the shocked attendant. The second man seized her other arm, and together, they began dragging her toward the open van door. For one frozen heartbeat, Grayson sat behind his wheel, unable to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in broad daylight, in front of luxury hotels, with witnesses everywhere. But the woman's scream cut through his paralysis like a knife. It was raw and terrified and real. And suddenly, Grayson wasn't sitting in his truck anymore. He was moving, his body acting on instinct honed by years of training he'd thought he'd never use again. He threw open his door and ran, his boots pounding against asphalt as he sprinted across Chancellor Avenue. A car horn blared as he dodged traffic, but he didn't slow down. The woman was fighting now, thrashing against her captors, but they were stronger, dragging her closer to the van. "Let her go." Grayson's voice tore from his throat, authoritative and commanding in a way it never was at the warehouse. One of the kidnappers looked up, surprise flashing in his eyes behind the mask. He barked something to his partner, words lost in the chaos, and reached into his jacket. Grayson saw the weapon emerging and didn't calculate odds or consider consequences. He just closed the distance and tackled the man with the full force of his momentum, both of them crashing to the pavement in a tangle of limbs. Pain exploded through Grayson's shoulder where they hit the ground, but he ignored it, using his weight to keep the man pinned. The weapon, a handgun, skittered across the sidewalk. "Call the police." Grayson shouted toward the hotel entrance, where people were finally starting to react, emerging from their shock. "Call 911 now." The second kidnapper still had hold of the woman, but now he was torn between completing the abduction and helping his partner. The van's driver was shouting something urgent from inside the vehicle. The woman made his decision for him. With a sudden burst of strength born from pure terror and adrenaline, she twisted in his grip and drove her elbow backward into his throat. He gagged, his hold loosening just enough for her to tear free, stumbling away from the van. But freedom was temporary. The man Grayson had tackled was stronger and better trained than he'd anticipated. He bucked upward violently, throwing Grayson off balance, then delivered a brutal punch to Grayson's ribs that drove the air from his lungs in a painful whoosh. Before Grayson could recover, the kidnapper was on his feet, and Grayson saw the flash of metal in his hand. Not the gun this time, a knife. "Should have minded your business," the man snarled, his voice muffled by the mask. He lunged forward, the blade cutting through the air toward Grayson's chest. Grayson threw up his arm instinctively, defensive training taking over, and felt white-hot fire streak across his forearm as the knife sliced through his jacket and the skin beneath. Blood bloomed instantly, hot and wet, but Grayson had been hurt before. Pain was just information, his old drill sergeant used to say. It told you where the damage was, but it didn't have to stop you. Instead of retreating, Grayson stepped into the attack, grabbing the man's wrist and twisting hard. His other hand came up in a tight, controlled strike to the solar plexus. The kidnapper's breath exploded out, and his grip on the knife faltered. Grayson didn't give him time to recover. He wrenched the wrist harder, forcing the knife to fall, then shoved the man backward into the side of the van with enough force to leave a dent in the metal panel. The second kidnapper was advancing now, fury radiating from every line of his body. The woman in the charcoal suit had stumbled against the hotel wall, breathing hard, her face pale with shock. Behind her, hotel security was finally emerging, along with guests who'd heard the commotion. "Run!" Grayson shouted at the woman. "Get inside, go!" But she seemed frozen, unable to move, her eyes locked on the violence unfolding before her. The second kidnapper rushed Grayson faster than expected. They collided hard, grappling for dominance, spinning in a violent dance on the sidewalk. Grayson could smell cigarettes and stale coffee on the man's breath, could feel the corded muscle beneath the dark clothing. This wasn't some random thug. These were professionals. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They slammed into a decorative planter, ceramic shattering around them. Grayson's injured arm screamed in protest, blood soaking through his sleeve, but he used his weight and momentum to drive his knee up into the man's midsection. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. The kidnapper's grip loosened. Grayson broke free and delivered a wild haymaker that connected with the man's jaw. Snapping his head sideways, the kidnapper staggered, momentarily stunned. That's when Grayson heard the sirens, distant but growing closer. Someone had actually called the police. Help was coming. The van's horn blared 3 sharp times. An abort signal. The first kidnapper, the one with the knife, was already scrambling toward the open door, clutching his ribs where Grayson had hit him, blood streaming from his nose behind the mask. The second man hesitated, looking between Grayson and the woman, clearly calculating whether he could still complete the job. "It's over," Grayson said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline screaming through his system. "Police are coming. You need to leave. Now." Something in Grayson's eyes, some combination of determination and barely controlled fury that came from 3 years of fighting just to keep his son fed and safe, made the kidnapper reconsider. He turned and bolted for the van. Grayson started after him, but his legs suddenly felt like rubber. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by the harsh reality of how much his arm hurt, how hard he was breathing, how close he'd come to something far worse than a knife wound. The van's tires screamed against the pavement as the driver floored it. The vehicle fishtailed slightly, nearly clipping a parked car, then shot forward into traffic. It blew through a red light at the intersection, horns blaring as other vehicles swerved to avoid collision, and disappeared into the evening traffic, taillights fading like dying stars. Silence descended, broken only by the approaching sirens and the sound of Grayson's ragged breathing. He stood in the middle of the sidewalk, rain beginning to fall in light drops, his arm throbbing with hot pulses of pain. His jacket was torn and bloody. His jeans were scuffed from hitting the pavement. He looked like he'd been through a war, which wasn't far from the truth. Slowly, carefully, he turned toward the woman. She was still pressed against the hotel wall, her charcoal suit disheveled, her dark hair falling loose from what had been an elegant updo. Rain mixed with what might have been tears on her cheeks. Her chest heaved with rapid, panicked breaths, and her hands shook violently against the stone facade. But her eyes, sharp and intelligent even in shock, were locked on him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The world seemed to pause, holding its breath. Then her legs gave out. Grayson lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground. She collapsed into his arms, trembling uncontrollably, and he held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other supporting her weight despite the screaming protest from his injured arm. "You're okay," he murmured, his voice rough but gentle. "You're safe now. I've got you." She didn't speak, just gripped his torn jacket with shaking fingers, her face pressed against his chest. He could feel her heart racing, could feel the tremors running through her body like earthquake aftershocks. The hotel doors burst open, and suddenly, there were people everywhere. Security guards rushing forward with urgent voices. Hotel staff throwing blankets over the woman's shoulders. Someone pointing at Grayson's bleeding arm and calling for medical attention. The sirens were loud now, right on top of them. 3 police cruisers screeched to a stop at the curb, followed closely by an ambulance, their red and blue lights painting the wet street in urgent, flashing colors. Grayson felt the woman being gently pulled from his arms by paramedics. She looked back at him as they led her away, her eyes wide and dark and filled with something he couldn't quite name. Fear, certainly. Shock, definitely. But underneath it all, something else. Recognition, maybe, or gratitude so profound it hurt to witness. "Sir, you're injured." A paramedic was guiding him toward the ambulance, her voice professional but concerned. "We need to look at that arm. Can you tell me your name?" "Grayson Foster." His voice sounded distant to his own ears, like it was coming from underwater. Behind him, more police cars were arriving. Officers were spreading out, securing the scene, taking statements from witnesses. The hotel entrance had become a chaos of flashing lights and urgent voices and the crackle of police radios cutting through the rain. Grayson sat on the back edge of the ambulance while a paramedic cut away his sleeve and began cleaning. The knife wound. It was deep, running from just below his elbow to his wrist, but miraculously hadn't hit any major vessels. "You're lucky," the paramedic said, her hands efficient as she worked. "An inch to the left and this would have severed your radial artery. You'd have bled out before help arrived." "Lucky, right." Grayson watched as other paramedics attended to the woman in the charcoal suit. She was sitting on a gurney now, wrapped in blankets, talking to a police officer. Even from this distance, even soaking wet, and clearly traumatized, there was something about her presence that commanded attention. The way she held herself despite the fear, the way people gravitated toward her with deference and concern. "The woman you saved," the paramedic said, following his gaze. "Do you know who she is?" Grayson shook his head. "No idea. Just saw she needed help." The paramedic whistled low. "You're about to become famous, Mr. Foster. That's Cassidy Rhodes. She's the CEO of Rhodes Global Industries. That company owns like half the tech infrastructure in this region." The name meant nothing to Grayson. He shrugged, then winced as the movement pulled at his injured arm. "Should I know who that is?" "She's one of the most powerful women in the country. Billionaire. Her company handles cloud services, cybersecurity, data management for Fortune 500 companies." The paramedic paused in her work to gesture toward the gleaming towers of the financial district visible in the distance. "See those buildings? Her company provides the backbone for most of the technology that makes them run." Grayson looked back at the woman. Cassidy Rhodes, apparently, and felt something twist in his chest. Of course she was wealthy. Of course she was important. Of course she was someone who mattered in the eyes of the world. And he was what? A warehouse supervisor who could barely make rent. A single father who bought generic cereal and shopped at discount stores and drove a truck that was older than some of his coworkers. Two different worlds that should never have collided. But they had. For a few violent, terrifying moments, their worlds had crashed together. And Grayson had done the only thing he knew how to do. Protect someone who needed protecting. Because that's what you did. Protecting now. 10. Mission. And Grayson had done the only thing he knew how to do. That's what decent people did. "Sir, I need to get your statement about what happened." A police officer approached, notebook in hand. His badge, identifying him as Officer Sullivan. He was young, probably mid-20s, with the eager professionalism of someone new to the job. Grayson nodded and began recounting the events, keeping his voice steady and factual. He described the black van, the two masked men, the attempted abduction, the brief fight. He described it the way he might describe a scene from a movie, detached and objective, because if he thought too hard about what he'd actually done, running toward armed men with nothing but his bare hands, putting himself between violence and an innocent person, he might start shaking and never stop. More officers arrived as he talked. Someone from hotel management appeared, wringing his hands and apologizing profusely to everyone in sight. Reporters began gathering at the police perimeter, cameras hoisted on shoulders, sensing a story that would lead the evening news. Through it all, Grayson kept glancing at Cassidy Rhodes. She was being loaded into an ambulance now, still wrapped in blankets, surrounded by what looked like private security personnel who'd arrived in sleek black SUVs. She was talking on a phone, her voice too quiet to hear from this distance. But her gestures were animated, urgent. Right before they closed the ambulance doors, she looked across the chaotic scene and found him. Their eyes met across the distance, across the flashing lights and milling people and the vast gulf between their worlds. She mouthed something. Maybe, thank you. Maybe something else. It was impossible to tell through the rain and the distance and the chaos. Then the doors closed and the ambulance pulled away. Lights flashing but no siren, disappearing into the wet evening. And Grayson was left standing there in his torn, bloody clothes, wondering what he'd just gotten himself into. Mr. Foster. Another officer approached, this one older, with sergeant stripes on his uniform. We're going to need you to come down to the station to make a formal statement. We'll also need photographs of your injuries for evidence. I need to call my neighbor, Grayson said, his voice suddenly tired. My son. I need to let her know I'll be late. Of course. Take your time. Grayson pulled out his phone with trembling hands and dialed Edith's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. Grayson, is everything all right? I'm fine, Edith, but I'm going to be really late tonight. There was an incident. He paused, trying to find words that wouldn't worry her too much. I witnessed something, and the police need me to answer questions. Is it okay if Miles stays with you until I get there? I'll come as soon as I can. Of course, dear. Don't you worry about Miles. He's already in his pajamas and we're reading before bed. Take all the time you need. Are you sure you're all right? You sound shaken. I'm okay. Just a long day, thank you, Edith. I don't know what I'd do without you. You don't owe me anything, Grayson. Just take care of yourself. Miles needs his father. He ended the call and looked down at his bandaged arm. The paramedic had done a good job. The bleeding had stopped and the wound was clean and dressed, but Grayson could already feel it stiffening, could already imagine how much it would hurt tomorrow and the day after that. How was he supposed to work at the warehouse with an injured arm? How was he supposed to lift and carry and manage freight when every movement sent pain shooting through damaged muscles? The reality of his situation was starting to sink in, pushing through the adrenaline fog. He'd played hero, and now he was going to pay the price. Lost wages, medical bills he couldn't afford. Maybe even a lost job if he couldn't perform his duties. And for what? For a woman who lived in a world so far removed from his own that they might as well be different species. But even as those bitter thoughts crossed his mind, Grayson pushed them away. Because when he closed his eyes, he could still see the terror in Cassidy Rhodes' face, could still hear her screams, could still feel the moment when those men's hands had grabbed her, trying to drag her into darkness and whatever fate awaited her there. And he knew with absolute certainty that he'd do it all again, every time. Without hesitation, because that's what his father had taught him, back when Grayson was young and his dad was still alive, still working 2 jobs to keep their family housed and fed. Son, he'd said, you measure a person not by what they have, but by what they do when someone needs help. You always step up. Always. Even when it costs you. That's what makes us human. His father had died when Grayson was 19. A workplace accident, at the factory, where he'd worked for 20 years. But those words had stayed with Grayson, had shaped him, had made him into the kind of man who would sprint toward danger instead of away from it, even if it left him bleeding, even if it left him broke, even if the world never noticed or cared. Mr. Foster. Officer Sullivan was waiting, gesturing toward a patrol car. Ready to go. Grayson nodded, took one last look at the Apex Grand Hotel with its golden lights and expensive cars and world of wealth he'd never be part of, and followed the officer to the waiting vehicle. As they drove toward the police station, Grayson's phone buzzed with notifications. He pulled it out and saw news alerts already appearing. Hero stops kidnapping outside luxury hotel. Single father fights off armed men in daring rescue. Warehouse worker saves billionaire CEO. There were already photos. Grainy cell phone footage someone had captured from inside the hotel, showing Grayson tackling the first kidnapper. Another shot of him holding Cassidy Rhodes after the attack, both of them soaked and bloody and alive. He was already famous. He was already a story, and Grayson realized with a sinking feeling that his quiet, anonymous life, the life where he just worked hard and raised his son and minded his own business, was over. Everything was about to change, he just didn't know how much. The police station smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Grayson sat in a hard plastic chair in an interview room, his bandaged arm throbbing in rhythm with his pulse, while Detective Lauren Hayes asked him the same questions for what felt like the 100th time. What did the men look like? What did they say? Did he notice any distinguishing features, vehicle details, anything at all that might help identify the attackers? He answered everything as thoroughly as he could, but the truth was it had all happened so fast, a blur of motion and violence that his brain had barely had time to process, let alone catalog with the kind of detail the detective needed. "You did good, Mr. Foster," Detective Hayes finally said, closing her notebook. She was a woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and gray-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Really good. Most people would have frozen or run the other way. You probably saved Miss Rhodes's life tonight." Grayson shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I just did what anyone would do." "No," she said firmly. "You did what most people wish they would do. There's a difference." She stood, extending her hand. "We'll be in touch if we need anything else. In the meantime, get some rest. Get that arm looked at properly. And Mr. Foster." She paused at the door. "Watch out for the reporters. This story is already everywhere, and they're going to want a piece of you." He left the station just after 11 at night. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the streets slick and reflective under the streetlights. True to the detective's warning, there were 2 news vans still parked outside, reporters and cameramen waiting despite the late hour. The moment Grayson emerged, they swarmed. "Mr. Foster, Mr. Foster, can you tell us what happened tonight? How does it feel to be a hero? Did you know who Cassidy Rhodes was when you saved her? Can we get a statement?" Microphones thrust toward his face. Camera lights blinded him. Questions came from every direction, overlapping and urgent. Grayson held up his good hand, shaking his head. "No comment, please. I just want to go home to my son. Is it true you're a single father? Did Miss Rhodes offer you a reward? What were you thinking when you ran toward those armed men?" He pushed through the crowd, keeping his head down, not answering. His truck was parked 2 blocks away. He'd had to leave it when the police brought him to the station. By the time he reached it, his shirt was soaked through with sweat despite the cool night air, and his hands were shaking again. He sat behind the wheel for a long moment, just breathing, trying to collect himself. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Text messages, missed calls, notifications from social media accounts he barely used. Everyone wanted something from him. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. Everyone except the one person who mattered. Grayson pulled up Edith's contact and sent her a quick text. "On my way." The drive to her apartment took 15 minutes through empty streets. She lived in the Ashford Heights complex, same as Grayson and Miles, just 2 floors down. She'd been a godsend ever since Monica left, never asking for much in return, always ready with a kind word or a home-cooked meal. She opened the door before he could knock, her face creased with worry. "Grayson, oh my goodness, look at you. Come in, come in." "I'm sorry it's so late, Edith." "Hush, I saw the news. I saw what you did." She pulled him inside, her small hands surprisingly strong as she guided him to her couch. "Sit down. Let me look at that arm. The paramedics already worked on it." She examined the bandage with practiced efficiency, making soft, disapproving sounds. "You need to keep this clean and dry. Change the dressing every day. And you need to see a doctor tomorrow for proper stitches." "Yes, ma'am." "Don't yes, ma'am me. I'm serious, Grayson. Infections are no joke. She disappeared into her kitchen and returned with a glass of water and 2 pain pills. For the hurt. Don't argue. He took them without protest, suddenly aware of how exhausted he was. His whole body ached. His arm felt like it was on fire. His head was pounding. "Miles?" he asked. "Sleeping like an angel. I put him in the guest room. He doesn't know anything about what happened, and I think we should keep it that way for now. Let him wake up naturally, have breakfast, then you can decide what to tell him." Grayson nodded gratefully. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." Edith's expression softened. She sat down beside him, patting his knee. "You're a good man, Grayson Foster. Your father would be proud." His throat tightened. He hadn't expected that to hit so hard, but it did. Like a fist to the chest. "I hope so. I know so." She stood, smoothing her housecoat. "Now you sleep on the couch tonight. I won't have you going upstairs and collapsing in your apartment. In the morning, we'll figure everything out." He wanted to argue, wanted to maintain some shred of independence, but he was too tired, too wrung out. So he just nodded and let her bring him a pillow and blanket. Let her fuss over him like the mother he'd lost when he was 22. And when she finally turned off the lights and shuffled back to her bedroom, Grayson lay in the darkness and let the reality of what had happened wash over him. He'd saved someone's life tonight. He'd risked his own life for a complete stranger. And now, everything was going to change. He just hoped he was ready for it. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by dreams of black vans and masked men, and a woman in a charcoal suit falling. Each time he jerked awake, his heart racing, his arm throbbing, disoriented until he remembered where he was. By the time dawnlight crept through Edith's curtains, he'd maybe managed 3 hours of actual rest. He heard movement in the guest room, small feet padding across the floor. A moment later, Miles appeared in the doorway, his hair sticking up in every direction, his pajamas rumpled, his favorite stuffed dinosaur tucked under one arm. "Dad." His voice was small, confused. "Why are you here? Where's Edith?" Grayson sat up, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured arm. "Hey, buddy, come here." Miles crossed the room and climbed onto the couch, snuggling against Grayson's good side. He smelled like Edith's lavender laundry detergent and the mint toothpaste Grayson bought because it was Miles's favorite. "I had to work really late last night," Grayson said carefully, "so Edith let me crash here instead of going all the way upstairs." "You sleep okay?" "Uh-huh." Miles's eyes found the bandage on Grayson's arm, and they went wide. "Dad, what happened to your arm?" "Oh, just a little accident at work. Nothing serious." "Does it hurt?" "A little bit, but I'll be fine." Miles's lower lip trembled. "You promise?" Grayson pulled his son closer, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "I promise, Miles. I'm okay. Everything's okay." Edith emerged from her bedroom, already dressed despite the early hour. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said brightly to Miles. "How about I make us some pancakes for breakfast?" "Pancakes?" Miles scrambled off the couch, his worry about Grayson's arm forgotten in the face of his favorite breakfast food. "Can we have chocolate chips in them?" "If your dad says it's okay." Miles looked at Grayson with those big hopeful eyes that could convince him to do just about anything. "Please, Dad, chocolate chip pancakes sound perfect, buddy." While Edith and Miles headed to the kitchen, Grayson checked his phone. The number of notifications had multiplied overnight. His voicemail was full, his inbox was overflowing. And there, near the top of his messages, was one from an unknown number that made him pause. "Mr. Foster, this is Preston Ford, head of security for Miss Cassidy Rhodes. She would like to speak with you at your earliest convenience. Please call me at this number to arrange a meeting. It's important." Grayson stared at the message for a long moment. Part of him wanted to delete it, to pretend last night had been a dream, to just go back to his normal life of work and bills and bedtime stories. But he knew that wasn't possible anymore. The world had shifted, and there was no putting it back the way it was. He glanced toward the kitchen, where he could hear Miles chattering excitedly about something that happened at school yesterday. Edith responding with warm enthusiasm. His son was happy, safe, loved. That was all that mattered. Grayson typed a quick response. "I can meet today if needed. Let me know when and where." The reply came almost instantly. 2 p.m., Stockton Bay Medical Center, private wing. Ask for Miss Rhodes' room at the main desk. Thank you, Mr. Foster. Hospital. Right. Cassidy Rhodes had been taken to the hospital last night. He'd been so focused on his own situation, on getting through the police interviews and getting home to Miles, that he hadn't really thought about how she was doing. Had she been injured? Was she okay? The guilt settled in his stomach like a stone. Breakfast was a warm domestic affair that felt surreal given everything that had happened. Miles ate his pancakes with such enthusiasm that he got chocolate on his nose, making both Grayson and Edith laugh. For those few minutes, sitting at her small kitchen table with morning sunlight streaming through the windows, Grayson could almost pretend everything was normal. But then his phone rang. He checked the caller ID and grimaced. It was Tom, his supervisor at Hammond Distribution. Grayson stepped into the living room to take the call. Tom. Hey. Grayson. Jesus Christ, man. Are you okay? I've been seeing your face all over the news this morning. They're calling you a hero. I'm fine. Just a cut on my arm. I'll be back to work as soon as I can. No. Take the week off. Paid. Don't argue with me on this. Tom's voice was firm but kind. You saved someone's life. Grayson, you need time to recover. Besides, with that arm, you'd be useless on the floor anyway. No offense. None taken. But Tom, I can't afford to take a week off. I've got rent coming up and Miles needs new shoes and, Grayson, I said paid. The company's covering it. Hell, the owner saw the news and personally called me this morning to make sure you were taken care of. So rest, heal, and we'll see you next Monday. Got it? Grayson felt something loosen in his chest. Yeah, got it. Thanks, Tom. Thank you. What you did was incredible. Really incredible. Take care of yourself. After the call ended, Grayson stood in Edith's living room, staring at his phone. A paid week off. That was one problem solved, at least temporarily, but the meeting with Cassidy Rhodes still loomed ahead, and he had no idea what to expect. Stockton Bay Medical Center was one of the nicer hospitals in the city, all modern architecture and manicured grounds. The main lobby was bright and clean, with artwork on the walls and a massive flower arrangement on the reception desk that probably cost more than Grayson's monthly rent. He approached the desk, suddenly self-conscious in his worn jeans and button-down shirt. It was the nicest outfit he owned, the one he wore to parent-teacher conferences and the occasional job interview, but it felt inadequate here. I'm here to see Cassidy Rhodes, he said to the receptionist. I was told to ask at the main desk. The receptionist's eyes widened with recognition. Mr. Foster. Yes. We've been expecting you. Please take the elevator to the 8th floor. Someone will meet you there. The 8th floor was quiet, clearly a private wing where wealthy patients paid for peace and discretion. The moment the elevator doors opened, a man in a dark suit stepped forward. Mr. Foster, I'm Preston Ford, head of Miss Rhodes's security. He was tall, broad-shouldered, probably in his early 40s, with the bearing of someone who'd seen combat. His handshake was firm but respectful. Thank you for coming. Please follow me. They walked down a hallway that looked more like a luxury hotel than a hospital. Artwork on the walls, plush carpet underfoot, soft lighting. Preston stopped at a door near the end and knocked gently. Come in. A woman's voice called from inside. Preston opened the door and gestured for Grayson to enter. The room was spacious with a large window overlooking the city, comfortable furniture, and yes, a hospital bed, but one that looked far more comfortable than anything Grayson had ever seen in a medical facility. And sitting in a chair beside the window, wrapped in a silk robe over her hospital gown, was Cassidy Rhodes. She looked different in daylight. Her dark hair was pulled back, and there was a small bandage on her temple, but her eyes were clear and sharp as they found his. She stood the moment he entered, and Grayson noticed she moved stiffly, like someone who'd been through an ordeal, and was still feeling its effects. "Mr. Foster." Her voice was composed, but there was emotion underneath it. "Thank you for coming. Miss Rhodes, how are you feeling?" "Thank you, feeling better than I have any right to feel, thanks to you." She gestured to a chair across from hers. "Please sit. Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be great, thank you." Preston produced a bottle of water seemingly from nowhere and handed it to Grayson before quietly exiting the room, closing the door behind him. Suddenly, it was just the two of them, a warehouse supervisor and a billionaire CEO in a hospital room that cost more per night than Grayson made in a week. Cassidy sat back down, studying him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "They told me you refused to talk to the press." "I don't need the attention. I just did what anyone would do." "That's the second time you've said that." She leaned forward slightly. "But it's not true, Mr. Foster. Most people wouldn't have done what you did. Most people would have run the other way, or called for help, or frozen in fear. But you ran toward danger. You put yourself between me and those men. You got hurt protecting me." Her eyes dropped to the bandage on his arm. "How bad is it?" 15 stitches. "I'll be fine." 15. She said the word like it physically hurt. "You took a knife wound meant for me. Actually, I think the knife was just meant to stop me. But either way, it's healing." She was quiet for a moment, her hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "I don't remember everything clearly. The police said I was in shock, but I remember you holding me after it was over. I remember feeling safe for the first time since those hands grabbed me. And I remember thinking, who is this man? Why would he risk everything for a stranger?" Grayson took a sip of water, buying himself time. "I have a son. He's 8. And I thought, what if someone grabbed him? What if he was in danger, and no one helped because it wasn't their problem? I'd want someone to step up. So I did." Something shifted in Cassidy's expression, a crack in the composed facade. "What's your son's name?" "Miles." "Does he know what you did?" "Not really. I told him I helped someone at work. He knows I got hurt, but I didn't give him details. He's just a kid. He doesn't need to know how scary the world can be. You're protecting him the way you protected me. It's what fathers do. It's what decent people do." Cassidy stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. From this height, you could see for miles the business district with its gleaming towers, the residential neighborhoods spreading out like a patchwork quilt, the harbor glinting in the afternoon sunday. "I've lived in this city my entire life," she said quietly. "Built my company from nothing, worked 18-hour days, made decisions that affected thousands of people's lives. I always believed I was strong, capable, untouchable even." She turned to look at him. "Last night I learned how wrong I was, how vulnerable we all are, how quickly everything can be taken away." "Did they tell you anything about who those men were? Or why they targeted you?" "The police have some theories. Corporate espionage, kidnapping for ransom, a competitor trying to intimidate me. Take your pick. I've made enemies in my career. That's the cost of success in my world." Her jaw tightened, but they almost succeeded. "If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't acted." She trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the thought. "But I was there, and you're safe. Because of you." She returned to her chair, sitting down with the careful movements of someone still healing. "The press is calling you a hero. My board of directors wants to give you a medal. My security team wants to hire you. Everyone has an opinion about what should happen next." She paused. "But none of them asked what you want." Grayson blinked, surprised. "What I want? Yes. You saved my life, Mr. Foster. That creates a debt I can never truly repay. But I'd like to try. So tell me, what do you want?" It was such a strange question. What did he want? He wanted Miles to grow up happy and safe. He wanted to stop worrying about money every single day. He wanted to sleep through the night without nightmares. He wanted a future that didn't involve working himself to death like his father had. "I don't want anything," he said finally. "I mean, I appreciate the offer, but I didn't help you to get something out of it. I know that, which is exactly why I want to help you." Cassidy's gaze was unwavering. "I've already looked into your situation. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I needed to understand who you are." Grayson's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "You had no right." "You're right. I didn't. But I needed to know." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Do you know what I see when I look at you, Mr. Foster? I see someone who embodies everything I claim my company stands for. Integrity. Courage. Putting others first. But while I talk about those values in boardrooms and at charity galas, you actually live them every single day. Miss Rhodes, please, let me finish." She took a breath. "I want to offer you a job. Not in security, not as some token gesture to make myself feel better. I want you to head my new community safety initiative. It's a program I've been planning for months, providing resources and training for people who want to help their communities, funding neighborhood watch programs, supporting first responders. I need someone to run it who actually understands what it means to protect people. Someone who doesn't do it for glory or recognition, but because it's the right thing to do." Grayson stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You want me to run a program? The salary would be $120,000 a year, plus benefits. Full health insurance for you and Miles, a company car, paid vacation, everything you need to actually have a life, instead of just surviving." She pulled a folder from the table beside her chair and handed it to him. "This is a formal offer. Take it home. Think about it. Talk to your son, but know that this isn't charity, Mr. Foster. This is me recognizing talent and character when I see it. You'd be earning every penny." Grayson opened the folder with shaking hands. The number at the top of the contract made his vision blur. $120,000. That was more than triple what he made at the warehouse. That was a life. A real life. "I don't have experience running anything," he said, his voice rough. "I'm just a guy who shows up and does the work. And that's exactly what this job needs. Not another corporate executive who sees it as a line on their resume. Someone who genuinely cares." Cassidy's expression softened. "I almost died last night, Mr. Foster. That kind of experience changes your perspective. I've spent my whole life building my company, accumulating wealth and power, but what does any of it matter if I'm not using it to actually help people? You reminded me what real courage looks like, what real goodness looks like. Let me try to do something meaningful with that reminder." Grayson looked down at the contract, then back up at her. "Why do I feel like you're the one saving me now? Because maybe we both needed saving. Just in different ways." 3 days had passed since Grayson accepted Cassidy's offer, and he still felt like he was walking through a dream. He'd signed the contract sitting at Edith's kitchen table while Miles did homework and she made tea, her warm presence grounding him as he committed to a future that seemed impossible just a week ago. The money had already hit his bank account. The first installment of his new salary. Grayson had stared at the numbers on his phone screen for 10 solid minutes. Unable to believe they were real, he'd paid his overdue rent, settled his medical bills, bought Miles those new shoes he'd been asking for, and still had more money left over than he'd ever seen in his life. But something felt wrong. It started with small things. A car that seemed to follow him from the grocery store. A man in sunglasses watching their apartment building from across the street. Phone calls that disconnected the moment he answered. Grayson told himself he was being paranoid. The incident with the kidnappers had left him jumpy, seeing threats where none existed. But his instincts, honed by years in service and sharpened by raising a son alone in a city that wasn't always safe, kept screaming that something was off. On Thursday evening, as he was picking Miles up from school, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was short, direct, terrifying. "We know where you live. We know where your son goes to school. Stay out of what doesn't concern you." Attached was a photo taken that very day. Miles walking out of Brookstone Elementary, his backpack bouncing on his shoulders, completely unaware he was being photographed. Grayson's blood turned to ice. His hands shook as he immediately called Preston Ford. The phone rang once before Preston answered. "Grayson, what's wrong?" "I just got a threat. They have a picture of Miles. They know where we live. Forward me that message immediately. Don't move from where you are. I'm sending a team to you right now." Grayson did as instructed, his heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his throat. He looked at Miles, who was playing on the school playground with friends, laughing and carefree, completely oblivious to the danger that had found them. Every protective instinct Grayson possessed screamed at him to grab his son and run. But run where? If they knew where he lived and where Miles went to school, they could find them anywhere. A black SUV pulled up to the curb within 5 minutes. 2 men in suits stepped out, both wearing earpieces, both moving with the alert efficiency of trained security personnel. "Mr. Foster, I'm Agent Bowen, and this is Agent Tate. Mr. Ford sent us to provide security." The man who spoke was in his 30s with sharp eyes that swept the area, cataloging everything. "We need to assess the situation and discuss next steps. Is your son here?" "On the playground," Grayson said, his voice tight. "The one in the blue jacket." "Good, let's keep things calm. We don't want to scare him. Mr. Ford is on his way, and we'll discuss options with you." Preston arrived 15 minutes later, his face grim. He'd brought Cassidy with him, despite Grayson's protests that she shouldn't be out and exposed to risk. "This involves me too," she'd said when she stepped out of the armored vehicle. "Those men are after you because of me. I'm not hiding while you face this alone." They sat in Preston's vehicle, while Agent Bowen and Agent Tate maintained watch outside. Miles was still playing, supervised by teachers who'd been quietly briefed about the security presence. The message came from a burner phone, untraceable. Preston said, showing them his tablet. "But the threat is credible. The men who tried to take Cassidy are still out there, and now they see you as a liability. Someone who can identify them, testify against them." "What do I do?" Grayson's voice was barely above a whisper. "How do I keep Miles safe?" "We move you both tonight," Preston said firmly. "Cassidy has a secure property outside the city, gated community, 24-hour security, completely private. You and Miles stay there until we neutralize this threat. I can't just uproot him. He has school, friends, routines. He has a life." "He has a life," Cassidy said gently. "And right now, that life is in danger. We can arrange for a private tutor, temporarily. Edith can visit. But staying here isn't safe, Grayson. Not for you, and definitely not for your son." Grayson looked toward the playground where Miles was hanging upside down from the monkey bars, his laughter carrying across the distance. That innocence was worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth any sacrifice. "This is my fault," he said quietly. "I brought this on us." "No, you saved someone's life. The fault lies with the men who tried to take it." Preston's expression softened slightly. "I know this isn't what you signed up for, but Cassidy won't let anything happen to you, or Miles. You're under her protection now, which means you're under mine. And I promise you, we will keep you both safe." Grayson closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He thought about his father, about the promise he'd made to always protect Miles, about being the kind of man who didn't run from responsibility but also didn't needlessly endanger his son. "Okay," he said finally. "We'll go. But I need to pack some things, and I need to talk to Edith. She deserves to know what's happening. Take your time. We'll be here." Packing took an hour. Grayson filled 2 duffel bags with clothes and necessities, grabbed Miles's favorite toys and books, threw in school supplies and the stuffed dinosaur that Miles couldn't sleep without. Then he went to Miles's classroom and pulled him out early, explaining they were going on an adventure. An adventure? Right now? But I have math homework, Miles protested. We'll do it at the new place. It's going to be really cool, buddy. Trust me. Miles studied his face with those two perceptive eyes. Is something wrong, Dad? Grayson knelt down to his son's level. I need you to trust me, okay? Everything's going to be fine, but we need to go somewhere safe for a little while. Can you be brave for me? Miles nodded slowly, his small face serious. I can be brave. That's my boy. They stopped at Edith's apartment on the way out. Grayson explained everything. The threat, the photo, the decision to relocate temporarily. She listened with growing alarm, her weathered hands gripping his tightly. You do whatever you need to do to keep that boy safe, she said fiercely. And you call me every day, so I know you're both all right. I will, I promise. She hugged Miles tightly, whispering something in his ear that made him nod solemnly. Then she pulled Grayson into an embrace, her voice thick with emotion. Your father would be so proud of you. Not just for saving that woman, but for being the kind of father who puts his son first, always. They left Ashford Heights at 7 in the evening, escorted by Preston's team in 2 armored vehicles. Grayson watched through the rear window as their apartment building grew smaller in the distance, wondering when they'd be able to come home. Miles sat beside him, clutching his dinosaur, trying to be brave but unable to hide the fear in his eyes. Dad, are bad guys after us? Grayson pulled his son close. Some people are upset about what I did to help Miss Rhodes, but we have good people protecting us, and we're going somewhere very safe. I promise you, buddy, I will never let anything happen to you, never. I know, Dad. You're the bravest person I know. The words broke something in Grayson's chest. Here was his 8-year-old son, torn from his home and school and routine, facing threats he shouldn't have to understand, and still believing his father could protect him from anything. Grayson would die before he let that faith be proven wrong. The drive took 45 minutes through suburban sprawl, and then into countryside Grayson had never explored. When they finally turned through a gate with actual armed guards posted, Miles's eyes went wide. Whoa, this place is like a castle. The property was enormous, a sprawling estate with a main house that looked like something from a magazine and several smaller guest houses scattered across manicured grounds. Preston drove them to one of the guest houses, a 2-story cottage with warm lights glowing in the windows. Cassidy had it prepared for you, Preston explained as he helped carry their bags inside. Fully stocked kitchen, comfortable beds, security coverage around the clock. You're safe here, Grayson. The interior was beautiful. Hardwood floors, comfortable furniture, a kitchen bigger than their entire apartment had been. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms, each with their own bathroom. Miles's room had already been set up with furniture appropriate for a young boy, toys and books arranged as if someone had been expecting them. Maybe Cassidy had been. After Preston left and Grayson had tucked Miles into the unfamiliar bed, he stood at the window of the guest house, looking out at the dark grounds. Security lights dotted the perimeter. He could see the shadow of a guard patrolling in the distance. This was his life now. Not just the job and the salary and the new opportunities, but also the danger that came with it. The threats that followed courage. The price of doing the right thing. His phone buzzed. A text from Cassidy. Preston told me what happened. I'm so sorry, Grayson. We'll fix this. I promise you'll both be safe. He typed back. Thank you for everything. We'll be okay. Her response came quickly. You saved my life. The least I can do is protect yours. Get some rest. Tomorrow we'll figure out how to end this. Grayson set the phone down and looked at his reflection in the dark window. The man staring back at him looked tired, worried, but not broken, not defeated. He'd protected his son. He'd made the hard choices. He'd stepped into danger to save a stranger and changed both their lives in the process. And somehow, despite everything, he'd do it all again. Because that's what heroes did, even when the cost was higher than they'd ever imagined. The safe house became their prison over the next week. Not literally, of course. The guest house was comfortable, even luxurious by Grayson's standards, but the inability to leave, to return to normal life, to let Miles play with his friends or attend his regular school, wore on them both like sandpaper against raw skin. Miles tried to be brave about it. He worked with the tutor Cassidy had hired, a patient woman named Thania Foster, who made algebra feel like solving mysteries and turned history lessons into adventure stories. But Grayson could see the sadness in his son's eyes when he looked out the window at the sprawling grounds, missing his friends, his school, the life they'd had before everything changed. Edith visited every other day, always bringing food and stories from the apartment complex, maintaining that vital connection to their old world. But even her warm presence couldn't completely ease the tension that had settled over them like a heavy blanket. The investigation was moving slowly. Detective Hayes called with updates, each one less encouraging than the last. The kidnappers had disappeared like smoke. The van had been found abandoned in a warehouse district, burned to destroy evidence. The burner phone that sent the threat was untraceable. It was as if the men had vanished into thin air. Cassidy came by every evening after work, usually with dinner from some restaurant or another, always making time to check on them both. She'd sit with Miles and listen to him talk about what he'd learned that day, asking questions and treating an 8-year-old's observations with the same seriousness she probably gave to boardroom presentations. And then, after Miles was asleep, she'd sit with Grayson and they'd talk about the investigation, about the foundation work he was supposed to start but couldn't, about fear and courage and the weight of decisions that affected innocent lives. Somewhere in those late-night conversations, the boundary between employer and employee had begun to blur. They were two people thrown together by circumstance, finding common ground in their shared commitment to protecting what mattered most. On the 8th night in the safe house, everything fell apart. Grayson's phone rang at 2 in the morning, jolting him from restless sleep. The caller ID showed Preston's number. "Grayson, we have a situation." Preston's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Someone breached the outer perimeter. They're testing our security, probing for weaknesses. We've reinforced the guards around your cottage, but I need you to stay inside and stay alert." Grayson was on his feet instantly, moving to Miles's room. His son was still sleeping, blissfully unaware of the dangers circling them like wolves around a campfire. "How many?" Grayson asked, his voice low. "At least 3 that we've spotted. Could be more. They're professionals, Grayson. They know what they're doing." "Are we evacuating?" "Not yet. Moving you in the dark could be exactly what they want. We're better fortified here than we would be on the road. Just sit tight and let us handle this." The line went dead. Grayson stood in Miles's doorway, watching his son sleep, feeling more helpless than he'd ever felt in his life. During the kidnapping attempt, he'd been able to act, to fight, to do something. But now he was trapped in a guest house, while armed men prowled, the darkness outside. And all he could do was wait. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from an unknown number. Every instinct told him not to answer, but something made him press the green button. "Mr. Foster." The voice was male, accented, cold as winter ice. "You should have stayed out of this." "Who is this?" "Someone who gives you one last chance. Walk away. Tell the police you can't identify anyone. Refuse to testify. Forget everything you saw that night. And if I don't, then your son pays the price for your heroism." The caller let that sink in for a moment. "We can't get to you tonight. Your security is too good. But eventually, you'll leave that safe house. Eventually, you'll let your guard down. And when you do, we'll be waiting. The question is, Mr. Foster, is that woman worth your son's life?" The line went dead. Grayson stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear, his entire body shaking with a mixture of fear and rage, so intense he thought he might explode. They'd threatened Miles. Directly. Specifically. These people, whoever they were, had looked at an 8-year-old boy and decided he was acceptable collateral damage in whatever sick game they were playing. He wanted to scream. He wanted to put his fist through a wall. He wanted to find these men and tear them apart with his bare hands. Instead, he called Preston back and reported the threat. Then he sat in Miles's room for the rest of the night, a chair wedged against the door, watching his son sleep and wrestling with the hardest decision he'd ever faced. Morning came with gray light and no answers. The breach had been contained. The intruders had fled when security reinforcements arrived. But the message was clear. They could reach him, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. Cassidy arrived at 9 in the morning, her face pale, her eyes shadowed. Preston had clearly briefed her on the night's events. "We need to talk," she said. They sat in the guest house, living room, while Miles had breakfast upstairs with Thania, who'd been briefed to keep him distracted and calm. "I'm thinking about walking away," Grayson said before Cassidy could speak. "Telling the police I can't identify anyone, refusing to testify, whatever it takes to make this stop." Cassidy was quiet for a long moment. "I understand. Do you? Because your life isn't the one being threatened. Your son isn't being used as leverage. You're right. I can't possibly understand what you're feeling." She leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "But I can tell you what I see. I see a man who taught his son that protecting people matters, that doing the right thing is worth the cost. And now I see that same man considering abandoning those principles because evil men are using fear as a weapon." "They're using my son as a weapon," Grayson said, his voice breaking. "Miles didn't ask for any of this. He doesn't deserve to live in fear because I decided to play hero. No, he doesn't deserve it. None of this is fair." Cassidy's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But if you walk away, if you let these men win through intimidation, what lesson does that teach Miles? That we surrender to evil because it's easier. That we let bad people win because standing up is too dangerous. He's 8 years old. He shouldn't have to learn those lessons yet. Maybe not. But he's learning them anyway, because the world isn't fair and bad people exist." She reached across and took his hand. "The question is, what does he learn from watching you? Does he learn that his father gives up when things get hard? Or does he learn that sometimes protecting people costs something, but we do it anyway because it's right?" Grayson pulled his hand away, standing and pacing to the window. Outside, he could see security personnel patrolling, vigilant and professional. But how long could they maintain this? How long before someone made a mistake or got tired or these persistent predators found a weakness? "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this," he admitted quietly. "You tackled armed men to save a stranger. You took a knife wound protecting someone you'd never met. You're exactly strong enough." Cassidy stood and moved to stand beside him. "And you're not alone. I'm here. Preston is here. An entire team of people is working to end this. Let us help you. Let us be strong when you can't be. What if it's not enough? What if they get to Miles? They won't. I won't let them." The fierce determination in her voice made him turn to look at her. "You saved my life, Grayson. You risked everything for a stranger. Now let me risk something for you. Let me use my resources, my money, my power to protect you and your son. That's what friends do. Friends," Grayson repeated, and something in the way she looked at him suggested the word meant more than either of them was ready to acknowledge. "Yes. Friends." She squeezed his arm gently. "Don't give up. Not yet. Not when we're so close to catching these people." Before Grayson could respond, Preston appeared in the doorway, his expression urgent. "We have a break in the case. Detective Hayes just called. They've identified all 3 kidnappers, and they know who hired them. We're moving on arrests within the hour." Grayson felt his knees go weak. Who's behind this? Trevor Blackwell. He's a competitor of Cassidy's. CEO of Quantum Systems. She beat him out for a major government contract 6 months ago. and apparently he's been bitter about it. The kidnapping was about revenge and eliminating competition. He hired professionals to grab Cassidy, but when you intervened and became a witness, you became a target too. They're sure it's him. One of the kidnappers is cooperating in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's given them everything. Names, dates, wire transfers, showing payment from shell companies linked to Blackwell. It's airtight. Cassidy's face had gone pale. Trevor. We were colleagues once. I've known him for 15 years. Sometimes the people closest to us are the most dangerous when we threaten what they want. Preston said grimly. But it's over now. FBI is coordinating with local police for simultaneous arrests. By tonight, everyone involved will be in custody. Grayson sat down heavily, the relief so intense it was almost painful. It's really over. The threat is over. You and Miles can go home. Home. The word felt foreign and familiar at the same time. Could they really just go back to their apartment, back to normal life, after everything that had happened? But as he looked toward the stairs, where he could hear Miles laughing at something Thanya had said, Grayson realized normal didn't exist anymore. They'd been changed by this experience, shaped by fear and courage and the discovery that doing right things came with costs he'd never imagined. Still, they'd survived. They'd stayed strong. And the men who'd threatened his son would face justice. That had to be enough. By 6 that evening, Trevor Blackwell was in custody along with all 3 kidnappers and 2 other associates who'd helped plan and finance the operation. The news spread quickly, with reporters gathering outside the FBI field office and police headquarters, cameras ready to capture every detail of what was being called one of the most brazen corporate crimes in recent memory. Detective Hayes called Grayson personally to deliver the news. They're not getting out, Mr. Foster. We have them on kidnapping, attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, making terroristic threats, and about a dozen other charges. Trevor Blackwell is looking at 20 years minimum. The men who actually tried to grab Miss Rhodes? They'll be lucky to see daylight before they're old men. What about the threats against Miles? All the evidence will be presented to ensure enhanced charges for Pruva, endangering a minor. These men won't be able to threaten anyone for a very long time. After the call ended, Grayson found Miles in his temporary bedroom, reading a book about dinosaurs that Edith had brought during her last visit. Hey, buddy, can we talk for a minute? Miles set down his book and patted the bed beside him. Grayson sat, pulling his son close. Remember how I said we had to stay here for a little while because of some bad guys? Miles nodded solemnly. Are they still after us? No. The police caught them. All of them. They're going to jail for a very long time. Grayson felt tears prick his eyes. We're safe now, Miles. We can go home. His son's face lit up like sunrise. Really? We can go back to our apartment? And I can see my friends? And go back to my real school? Really? All of it? Miles threw his arms around Grayson's neck, hugging him so tightly it almost hurt. I was scared, Dad. I didn't want to say it because you were scared too, but I was really scared. I know, buddy. So was I. Grayson held his son close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo. But we got through it together. And now everything's going to be okay. Better than okay, Miles said, pulling back to look at him seriously. Because you're a hero, and you have a good job now, and Miss Cassidy is really nice and brings us good food. Grayson laughed, the sound feeling rusty from disuse. You're right. Better than okay. They packed that evening, gathering their belongings from the guest house that had been their sanctuary and prison for 9 days. Cassidy came by as they were loading the last bag into Preston's SUV, her expression a mixture of relief and something else Grayson couldn't quite identify. You don't have to leave tonight, she said. You could stay a few more days, make sure everything is really settled. We need to go home, Grayson said gently. Miles needs his normal life back. His friends, his school, his routine. We need to prove to ourselves that the fear is over. She nodded, understanding even if she didn't like it. Your job is waiting for you. Monday morning, if you're ready. We have a lot of work to do with the Community Safety Initiative. I'll be there. He paused. And Cassidy, Thank you. For everything. The job, the protection, the way you've looked out for Miles. I can never repay you for that. You saved my life, Grayson. We're even. But the way she looked at him suggested their connection went deeper than a simple exchange of favors. Miles emerged from the guest house carrying his stuffed dinosaur, and Cassidy knelt down to his level. Take care of your dad, okay? He's pretty special. I know, Miles said seriously. He's the bravest person in the whole world. She ruffled his hair affectionately. I think you might be right about that. The drive back to Ashford Heights felt surreal. The city looked the same, the streets familiar, but Grayson felt fundamentally changed. He'd left this place as a struggling warehouse supervisor barely making ends meet. He was returning as the director of a foundation with resources to actually help people, with financial security he'd never dreamed possible, with connections to a world he'd only glimpsed from the outside. But more than that, he was returning as someone who'd faced real danger and protected what mattered most, who'd been tested and hadn't broken, who'd chosen courage even when the cost was almost unbearable. Their apartment felt smaller than he remembered. The furniture looked shabbier, the walls closer together. But it was home, and Miles ran from room to room touching familiar things as if reassuring himself they were real. Edith appeared at their door within minutes of their arrival, her face wet with happy tears. Oh, thank God. Thank God you're both safe. She pulled them both into a fierce hug. I've been so worried. Every day, wondering if you were okay, if those terrible men had been caught. We're okay. Edith. We're home. She pulled back, studying Grayson's face. You look different. Older somehow. I feel older. Like I've aged 10 years in the past 2 weeks. But stronger too. Like you've been tested and passed. She smiled through her tears. Your father would be so proud, Grayson. So incredibly proud. That night, after Miles was finally asleep in his own bed, Grayson sat on their small balcony and called Cassidy. She answered on the first ring. Are you settled in? As much as we can be. It feels strange being back, but good strange. Like returning to something familiar but seeing it with new eyes. I know what you mean. She was quiet for a moment. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about being even. I don't think we are. Cassidy, you gave me a job that changed my life. You protected my son. You showed me what courage looks like when it's not calculated or strategic. She interrupted softly. You reminded me that some people still act on pure instinct to help others, even when it costs them everything. That's worth more than any job or protection I could provide. Grayson felt his chest tighten with emotion. So where does that leave us? I don't know, but I'd like to find out. If you're willing to try. He thought about the past 2 weeks. About the fear and the danger, and the moments when Cassidy had been there with support and strength and genuine care for him and Miles. He thought about the way she looked at him, like he was someone valuable, someone worthy, someone who mattered for reasons that had nothing to do with wealth or status. I'm willing, he said quietly. Good, because you've become more than an employee, Grayson Foster. You've become someone I trust, someone I admire, someone I care about more than I probably should given the circumstances. The circumstances being that you're a billionaire CEO, and I'm a guy who was working in a warehouse 2 weeks ago. The circumstances being that we met in the most traumatic way possible, and everything since has been complicated and dangerous, and not exactly conducive to building a normal relationship. She laughed softly. But then again, maybe we were never meant to be normal. Maybe not. Grayson agreed. Maybe extraordinary is better. They talked for another hour about everything and nothing. About Miles and the foundation, and the future they might build together. And when they finally said goodnight, Grayson felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope that was untainted by fear or doubt, or the constant worry about making ends meet. He had a good job. His son was safe. The people who'd threatened them were behind bars. And maybe, just maybe, He'd found someone who saw him for exactly who he was, and valued that person. It wasn't the life he'd planned, but it was better than anything he could have imagined. 6 months passed, and the rhythm of Grayson's new life finally began to feel natural rather than surreal. He'd thrown himself into the WRA, Community Safety Initiative, working with Detective Hayes and community leaders to develop programs that actually addressed the needs of neighborhoods that had been overlooked for too long. The foundation funded neighborhood watch training in 12 communities across Stockton Bay, provided security equipment and communication systems for volunteer patrols, and partnered with local police departments to improve trust and cooperation between residents and law enforcement. Every week brought new challenges, new problems to solve, new people to help. But unlike his warehouse job, where he'd felt like an interchangeable cog in an impersonal machine, this work mattered. He could see the direct impact of his decisions, could measure success in safer streets, and empowered communities and people who'd been inspired to look out for each other. The office became his second home. He'd grown comfortable in the corporate environment with help from Patricia, Cassidy's executive assistant, who'd taken him under her wing and taught him the unwritten rules of navigating business politics. He'd learned to speak the language of budgets and grant proposals, to present at board meetings without his voice shaking, to make decisions that affected millions of dollars and thousands of lives. Miles had adjusted remarkably well to everything. He'd returned to Brookstone Elementary and reconnected with his friends, though Grayson now had a security detail that discreetly monitored the school perimeter. It was a compromise between safety and normalcy that they'd all learned to accept. His son was thriving. The financial pressure had lifted from their household, and Grayson could finally afford things he'd only dreamed about before. Music lessons when Miles showed interest in learning guitar. A real birthday party with his whole class instead of just cake with Edith. New clothes that weren't from thrift stores. Small luxuries that most people took for granted but meant everything to a father who'd once had to choose between paying electric bills and buying groceries. But the biggest change was Cassidy. Over the 6 months, their relationship had evolved from employer and employee to genuine partnership. She'd been right that night on the phone. They'd been through something extraordinary together, and it had created a bond that went deeper than romantic attraction or professional respect. They'd taken it slowly, mindful of Miles and the potential complications. Dinner dates after work that turned into long conversations. Weekend trips to museums and parks where Cassidy treated Miles with the same genuine interest she showed everything else in her life. Quiet evenings at her estate or his apartment, learning each other's rhythms and quirks and histories. She told him about building her company from nothing, about the sacrifices and compromises, about the loneliness of success when everyone wanted something from you. He told her about his years in service, about Monica's betrayal, about the fear and determination that came with single parenthood. They'd built something real on a foundation of shared values and mutual respect, and somewhere along the way, Grayson had fallen completely in love with her. On a Saturday morning in late spring, Cassidy invited Grayson and Miles to her estate for what she called a small celebration. When they arrived, they found the grounds transformed for an outdoor event. "What's all this?" Grayson asked, as they walked past tables being set up by catering staff. "The Foundation's 6-month celebration," Cassidy said, smiling mysteriously. "We've accomplished so much, and I wanted to recognize the people who made it happen. Community leaders, volunteers, police partners, and of course, the director who turned a concept into reality." The party started at noon. Grayson found himself surrounded by faces he'd come to know over the past months. Thania Foster, who'd become the Foundation's education director, Detective Hayes, who'd partnered with them on community policing initiatives, Edith, who'd joined the Foundation's advisory board and brought decades of wisdom about neighborhood dynamics. There were speeches celebrating the Foundation's impact, statistics about crime reduction in areas where they'd implemented programs, testimonials from residents who felt safer in their communities, stories about neighbors looking out for each other, about volunteers who'd prevented crimes through vigilance and cooperation. about police officers who'd built trust through the foundation's partnership programs. And then Mayor Richardson took the microphone, his presence unexpected but clearly planned. 6 months ago, a single father witnessed a kidnapping attempt and made a split-second decision that changed multiple lives. The mayor began. Grayson Foster ran toward danger when most people would have run away. He fought armed men to protect a stranger. He risked his life because it was the right thing to do. Grayson felt his face flush as every eye turned toward him. But what happened next is just as remarkable. The mayor continued. Instead of letting that moment define him, instead of resting on the laurels of being called a hero, Grayson took the opportunity he was given and built something meaningful with it. In 6 months, the Rhodes Community Safety Foundation has transformed neighborhoods across this city. Crime is down 18% in areas with active programs. Community trust in law enforcement is at the highest level we've measured in a decade. People feel empowered to protect their own neighborhoods. The mayor gestured for Grayson to join him, and reluctantly, Grayson stood and walked to the front of the gathering. Grayson Foster represents everything this city should aspire to be, Mayor Richardson said, placing a hand on Grayson's shoulder. Courage, integrity, dedication to helping others. And that's why it's my honor to present him with the Stockton Bay Medal of Valor, our city's highest civilian honor. The crowd erupted in applause as the mayor pinned a medal to Grayson's shirt. He looked out at the gathering and saw Miles, standing next to Edith, his face shining with pride. Saw Cassidy watching him with an expression that made his heart stutter. Saw community leaders and volunteers and police officers all applauding not just what he'd done that rainy night, but what he'd built in the months since. I don't have a fancy speech prepared, Grayson said when the applause finally died down. I'm still learning how to do this, how to be the person everyone seems to think I am. But I can tell you this, 6 months ago, I made a choice in about 3 seconds. I saw someone in danger, and I helped. That's it. No master plan, no expectation of reward, just instinct, and a belief that when someone needs help, you don't look away. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But what happened after, that's the real story. Miss Rhodes didn't just thank me and move on. She saw potential in someone the world had overlooked. She gave me resources and support to actually make a difference. She turned one moment of courage into something that's helping thousands of people. His eyes found Cassidy's. This foundation isn't about me being a hero. It's about recognizing that every community has people who care, who want to help, who just need support to act on their courage. We're not creating heroes. We're empowering the heroes who already exist in every neighborhood. The applause this time was thunderous, and as Grayson stepped away from the microphone, Cassidy was there to meet him. Proud of you, she murmured, kissing his cheek in full view of everyone. I couldn't have done any of this without you. We did it together. That's how the best things work. The celebration continued through the afternoon, with food and music, and the easy warmth of people who'd worked together towards something meaningful. Miles played with other attendees' kids on the estate grounds, his laughter carrying across the lawn. Edith held court with a group of community leaders, sharing stories and wisdom. Preston stood at the periphery, ever vigilant, but even he seemed more relaxed. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the estate, Cassidy found Grayson standing apart from the crowd, looking out at the city in the distance. Thinking deep thoughts, just reflecting on how different everything is now. He turned to look at her. 6 months ago, I was barely surviving, working 2 jobs, worried about every bill, wondering how I'd give Miles a decent future. And now look at all this. Regrets? None. Well, maybe one. He took her hand. I regret that we met the way we did. That you had to go through something so terrifying. But I can't regret where it led us. Cassidy leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. I don't regret it either. Any of it. Because it brought you into my life, and you've reminded me what really matters. Not money, or power, or business success, but connection. Integrity, the courage to be vulnerable with another person. Is that what we're being? Vulnerable? Terrifyingly so. She pulled back to look at him, I've spent my whole life building walls to protect myself from people who wanted something from me, but you never wanted anything except to help. You saw me as a person, not an opportunity. Do you know how rare that is? I'm starting to understand it's pretty special." He smiled. "So what happens now?" "Now we keep building. The foundation, our relationship, a life that matters. We take it one day at a time and see where it leads." She paused. "But I should warn you, I'm falling in love with you, Grayson Foster. Completely and irreversibly in love." His breath caught. "That's funny. Because I'm already there. Have been for a while now." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and somewhere in the distance Miles cheered, making them both laugh against each other's lips. They'd found each other in chaos and danger, had built trust through crisis and threat. Now they had the chance to build something beautiful in peace and safety. A partnership, a family, a future neither had expected but both desperately wanted. It wasn't a fairy tale. There would be challenges ahead, complications to navigate, moments when the differences in their backgrounds and experiences would create friction. But they'd face those challenges together, with the courage and integrity that had brought them together in the first place. As the celebration wound down and guests began to depart, Grayson found himself standing with Cassidy and Miles, watching the last of the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "This is nice," Miles said contentedly. "All of us together." "Yeah, buddy," Grayson agreed, pulling his son close with one arm while the other wrapped around Cassidy. "This is really nice." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Grayson Foster felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. 2 years after that rainy evening outside the Apex Grand Hotel, Grayson Foster stood in a small chapel decorated with simple white flowers, watching Cassidy Rhodes walk toward him in an elegant ivory dress. Miles stood beside him as best man, holding the rings with solemn pride, his suit perfectly tailored, and his hair finally cooperating after 3 attempts to tame it. The ceremony was intimate, deliberately small. After years of Cassidy living every moment in the public eye, of business dinners and corporate events and strategic networking, she'd wanted this day to be purely about them. Just family and close friends in a setting that prioritized meaning over spectacle. Edith sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Preston stood nearby, official duties momentarily forgotten as he watched with something approaching a smile. Detective Hayes was there, along with Thania Foster and several community leaders who'd become genuine friends through the Foundation's work. As Cassidy reached the altar and took Grayson's hands, he felt the full weight of how far they'd both traveled. From that moment of terror and courage to this moment of joy and commitment, from 2 people from impossibly different worlds to partners who'd learned that love didn't care about bank accounts or social status or the proper way things were supposed to work. "You saved my life that night," Cassidy said when it came time for her vows, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "But more than that, you saved me from a life where success was measured only in profits and power. You showed me what real courage looks like, what real goodness means. You reminded me that we're all capable of being heroes if we just choose to try." Grayson's own vows were simpler. "I ran toward danger that night because someone needed help. I never expected it would lead me to you, to this life, to becoming the man I always hoped I could be. You saw something in me I didn't see in myself, and you gave me the chance to prove you weren't wrong. I promised to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that faith." When they kissed, Miles cheered loudly, exactly as he'd promised he would, making the whole chapel erupt in laughter. The reception was held at the estate, under strings of lights as stars emerged in the darkening sky. It was perfect in its simplicity, in its focus on celebration rather than display, in the way it brought together people from every part of their journey. Late in the evening, after the cake had been cut and the dancing had begun, Grayson found himself standing at the edge of the party with Cassidy in his arms, swaying gently to music that drifted across the lawn. "Happy?" she asked. "Beyond measure," he replied honestly. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that I get to have this life, this family, This purpose. Believe it. You earned every bit of it. She leaned back to look at him. The foundation just got approved for expansion into 3 more cities. Your model is working, Grayson. You're changing lives across the entire region. He thought about that. About the hundreds of communities they'd touched. The thousands of people who'd been trained and empowered to protect their neighborhoods. The ripple effects of one moment of courage spreading outward in ways he'd never fully comprehend. We're changing lives, he corrected. This only works because you gave me the resources and support to build it. We saved each other, Cassidy said, echoing words they'd spoken long ago. That's what partners do. Miles ran up to them, slightly out of breath from dancing. Can we do the sparklers now? You? Promise sparklers. They gathered everyone outside as night settled fully over the estate. Each guest received a sparkler, and on the count of 3, they lit them simultaneously. The darkness filled with golden light and laughter, with the fizz and crackle of fire and celebration. Grayson looked around at the faces illuminated by sparkler glow. At Edith, who'd been his anchor through the hardest years. At Preston, who'd protected them when danger circled close. At Detective Hayes and Mayor Richardson and community leaders who'd believed in his vision. At Miles, his son, his purpose, his reminder that every choice mattered because it shaped the world his boy would inherit. And at Cassidy, his wife now, his partner, his proof that courage could lead to grace. They'd built something beautiful from something terrible, had transformed fear into purpose, danger into opportunity, one moment of instinct into a legacy that would outlast them both. The sparklers began to fade, but the light remained. In the faces around him, in the work they'd accomplished, in the promise of tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. Grayson Foster had been a single father working in a warehouse, invisible to a world that measured worth in wealth and status. Now he was a director, a husband, a man who discovered that heroism wasn't about one dramatic moment, but about showing up every day and choosing to help, to build, to believe that one person could make a difference. He'd run toward danger to save a stranger, and in doing so, he'd saved himself. And that made all the fear, all the risk, all the impossible challenges, absolutely worth it. Because sometimes courage costs everything, but sometimes it gives back even more. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.